intro here. All right, students, I just want to welcome you guys back to Community Conversations. Today, we are blessed to have a perspective that we've been missing. This is Brett, who we met through through Deborah Devine and her work with the Indiana Prison Writers Workshop. So, Brett, thank you so much for joining us. We're really excited to hear your perspective and hopefully kind of grow in empathy and understand the system a little bit better. We can just get started. Would you just kind of introduce yourself and talk about, who you are, where you're from, and, what you were like prior to your incarceration?
Sure. So, as you introduced me, I'm Brett, and where I'm from is a little more complicated. I spent the majority of my younger life in Martinsville, and I lived in Indianapolis. I've lived in Franklin. I've lived in Greenwood. I moved around a lot growing up. Things were pretty good until my parents ended up, I was adopted. I'll start there. So at 4, I was adopted. At 7, my parents got divorced. And then it was sort of this war between them, and me and my 2 adopted sisters were caught in the middle of that. So as a result, I became more internally focused and lashed out a little more violently as the years went on. To cope with that, turned to drugs, to alcohol, to things to help me manage what I was feeling internally, and which ultimately kind of led to my journey in prison, where I spent the next 24 years. I was 18 when I got locked up, and then I just got out 3 months ago, and I'm 42.
I'm going to provide your blog to my students, but as I was looking through it, you had a quote in your blog that just really stuck out to me. You said, "The hardest trait to hang on to in prison is your humanity." Can you talk to us about what you meant by that?
Sure. So it's kind of two-sided, because in prison you have their rules, which are the prison rules, and then you have what we term like our rules, like the rules of the inmates, and they don't always coincide. So to go along with all the established rules, you kind of look a certain way to the other guys inside, and it's not always good. So you have to maintain this fine balance, and in the course of doing that, you sort of end up losing a bit of your humanity, because when you're doing a long stretch like I did, you have to understand that most of the people are going to change. Some of them will even die before you get out. So you can't live what I termed half in and half out. You can't live with 1 foot inside the prison and then 1 foot on the outside waiting to get out. So you have to sort of commit yourself to living inside by those rules, with the hope that you kind of lock away this part of your humanity, that you can retrieve that when the time comes, when it's time for you to be released, that you can just kind of get that little box back and unlock it, and then maybe foster that to grow a little bit. So it's hard to maintain that because prison, especially in those days, it was the late 90s, it was a little more violent, a little rougher. It was there was things you kind of had to do and witness and just be in that world. And in that, just like a comparison often given is like soldiers at war, because they see a lot of things, they endure a lot of things, and it changes them when they come home. And prisoners, to a degree, while not, as valorous as a soldier, kind of deal with the same sort of things.
While you were in prison, did you do the creative writing workshop with Deborah?
Yeah, actually, I went through that twice.
Okay. Talk to me about that experience, because it sounds to me like it would be incredibly difficult to be vulnerable in that space, because that could be read as like weakness. Did you experience that as you went through the program? And then how did that program, what was the program like for you?
Certainly, and that's a good point on that. Because when I went to that program, I was towards the end of my prison sentence. I had been locked up, I think, 22 years or so at that time when that program came around. So I had all that experience behind me. And going into that program was unexpected in that regard, because it is a space that you get these guys together. A lot of these really, kind of cliched, tough and tattooed guys who go in there and just kind of stare at each other for a minute. And then over the course of the program, they start to open up a little bit and reveal their vulnerabilities and reveal their inner turmoils and the things they struggle with. And it's really surprising. It surprised me as long as I've been locked up to see some of the things that those guys were unveiling in that class. And I think it generated a lot of respect for the program and Deborah and Tiffany who came in there because we saw it as sort of the sacred space where we could be vulnerable and we could let those things out and not be judged by it, and in a way that was creative and productive. And by doing that, we also got uh, not criticism is kind of a harsh word, but and essentially, yes, we got criticism from our other peers in the classroom who critiqued our work and gave us
Wow.
input. And the thought of those extremely personal things never really came up. It was more like, I like how you did that, and maybe you could have unveiled a little bit more this way, or on the technical aspect of the writings. And that was really kind of cool to be a part of.
Wow. As you move towards the end of your sentence, there's a quote that stuck out to me on your blog as well. I think it's on the front cover, if I remember correctly. You have a quote from Nelson Mandela, who also served a long prison sentence. And he said, "As I walked out the door toward the gate that would lead to my freedom, I knew if I didn't leave my bitterness and hatred behind, I'd still be in prison." What did that quote mean to you?
Yeah, I like that quote a lot, because the path that led me to prison was anger and hatred. And you kind of hold on to some of that while you're inside. The things that are done as a prisoner, you tend to get this one-sided view of like what the administration does, and everything's amplified. It seems often much worse than it is, and it creates more anger and more hatred. And so realizing, as I got closer to the end of my sentence, like I'm going to be back out in the world around the people who I don't want to point fingers and blame anybody for what I did and me going to prison, but people who impacted me and who had a part in that. So I realized, I could hold on to that hatred, but then that's just another prison. That's just more things I have to deal with, more things that will unearth these sort of really bad feelings. And I didn't want to be a part of that. So that quote really kind of resonates. I know it's a little different in his circumstances because of the nature of his incarceration, but still understanding that you have to let go of that stuff if you want to be successful on the outside, because we face so many prejudices and biases just from where we've been and what we've done.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because that's something I want to key in on. I want you to help my students understand. I know you've only been out for about 3 months, so this is fresh, but can you talk to me about the challenges that you're facing, including those prejudices and biases that you have to deal with now, possibly for the rest of your life now that you're out?
Sure. And that's actually a hard question for me because the circumstances of my release, I've been really, really blessed about this. So I'll talk some from my perspective and the perspectives of a lot of the other people I know. So when I got released from prison, I was guaranteed a job working for a company called The Last Mile, who has another program in prison that teaches uh, inmates how to program computers, how to build web applications, which is what I do now. So with that program, there's a giant community of returned citizens, people who've come out of prison. So I can speak from some of their influences too, because we all communicate together in an app called Slack. So having that job helped me a lot. And that's the thing that a lot of returned citizens struggle with is getting employment. Few people trust somebody who's been locked up, particularly if somebody's been locked up for something like theft or robbery or any kind of like white collar crime. It's harder for them maybe to get jobs. And the same for people who have been incarcerated for a violent crime. That is difficult to get a job in certain industries as well. So that's difficult. Seeing people's biases, one thing I thought would be a little more troubling would be because I have a lot of tattoos, prison ink. So going somewhere like Walmart or something, I had in my mind like, man, these people are going to single me out. They're going to look at me and immediately know that I was locked up forever. And that hasn't been my experience. So going to places publicly, no one really pays me much mind, which was kind of relieving and interesting because that was like my own bias. Like I had my own bias of how people would perceive me. So I think that's something that should be worked on both sides of the fence. Getting used to life in general. Like I said, I was 18. I had no experience really living on my own with responsibilities, things like rent, budgeting for groceries, uh, going and understanding what you need versus what you want, and taking care of your bills. So that's been a bit of a learning curve. I haven't struggled with it a lot, but I understand by a lot of the men that I was around, seeing where many people will struggle with that, particularly those who were locked up young like me and got out and had no exposure to that. Again, I'm blessed because I have a large returned citizen community that I can Slack with and ask them, hey, does anybody know about this or that? And I'll get a bunch of answers. I have good family and friends as well that help.
Right.
Support is the hugest thing to have for successful reentry. You have to have people willing to support you, help you, and just be patient with you.
Yeah. I think for a lot of students, they don't grasp just the level of what it takes to start again. I know in your blog you were talking about like you got to figure out a driver's license, and you're trying to figure out an apartment really for the first time in your life, and there's this long laundry list of things that you've got to figure out. Can you think of ways that we are failing to provide necessary resources for folks who are coming out of prison sentences? What are things that they need that many of them are not getting right now?
Okay, so again, I'm in a unique position there because having gone through the program, the last mile that I did, they have all these resources available for
Yeah.
returned citizens. So I was kind of hand fed those sort of things, but I do know other people who haven't. And so the comparison there is stark for me. And things, even though I have that sort of support, there are still things that I struggle with and can see maybe a little bit more usefulness would come out of some attention paid to it. So things like getting a driver's license, as you mentioned, was a bit confusing for me because the nature of I had a license when I got locked up, and then because I was locked up for 24 years, it was expired.
Yeah.
And because my license was expired when I got out, I had to get it reinstated basically. And so I had an option of either just taking the test blind. I haven't driven anything for almost 2.5 decades, or I could hold a learner's permit again for 6 months before they would let me drive. So coming out being on your own and then having to wait 6 months, as I know some returned citizens are doing right now, is difficult because they need to get places now to get their life back in order. So understanding things like that, education in areas like insurance, like I have no idea about health insurance or anything like that. It's provided through my company. I have it, but I had no idea what to do with it, how to use it. So I have to, Google everything and understand all these uh, different avenues of life that everyone just knows because they're grown up doing that.
Right.
Even something like doing laundry, I had to learn how to do my own laundry.
Right.
So those just kind of any education that will help people, and in an unobtrusive way, because um, a lot of the men I know who got out are very prideful. So they don't like to ask for help. So if they don't ask for help, then they're just going to kind of struggle silently. So if there could be a way for people to offer them assistance or help in a way that doesn't seem demeaning or down-putting, then it would probably help some of them out.
What I really appreciate about this conversation, in my class we talk a lot about the tone and the lens with which we talk about people. And so, instead of referring to people as felons, calling them returned citizens, which I've heard you use that phrase several times, I just think it shifts the tone and it humanizes them and recognizes that these are people first. And then there's these other tributes, right? But starting with people's humanity, I think goes a long way to actually understanding issues. issues. In class, we've talked about the way in the past we've had to dismantle things like the fact that for a long time, if you had ever committed any type of drug charge, you were just banned for life from public housing. Or, I mean, there's all these different obstacles we put in people's way that made it difficult to rehabilitate, and basically set people up to go right back to prison. And so I think that we're in the process of dismantling some of those things, but there's certainly work to be done. Can you talk to us just about? I know you work for the Last Mile, and I'll provide that website for my students as well. What's next for you? I know you only got about 3 months out now, but what are you looking for in terms of what you want to build with your life?
Yeah, that has been something I've talked with several of my peers and mentors about too, because going through prison, I had all these different ideas. So early on in my incarceration, I got the idea like I wanted to study math and physics. So I did that for a long time because my mindset then was I want to do something productive with my mind, and I want to do something that I can do in the constrictive environment of prison. And so I can always have books and paper and sit there and scratch out math and physics problems pretty easily. So for a long time, I wanted to do that. And then when the opportunity came about for me to get involved in the Last Mile, then that really shifted sort of my paradigm, the way I wanted to perceive myself in the world. And so I really enjoy web development. And so on top of working for them, I've also started my own company, Eclectic Design, where we sort of freelance web development work on the side as well. And that company is formed of formerly incarcerated. So, and all people who have gone through the Last Mile program because they have the skill set necessary to build these things. So I want to continue in that avenue. I want to continue a strong web presence, building things for the internet, which in and of itself is interesting because in 97, when I was locked up, the internet was like 2 years old and nothing like it is today. So I had no real world experience with the internet. Even what we learned to code with in prison through the program is not the real internet. So getting out and getting exposed to that just fostered that love even more. So I definitely want to do that. I definitely want to continue writing
Yeah.
because I did that a lot throughout my sentence. I even wrote, which I'm working on now, is not necessarily an autobiography, but a giant memoir of my life. So from the time I was born all the way up to getting in prison, my time in prison and my time out. I started that while I was inside, and I'm in the process now of finishing that, and I want to publish that. I write technical articles for Medium about coding. I write on my blog. So writing is a big part of what I do as well. And I want to help. I want to make sure that there's a bridge formed between returned citizens and people who are not, or who don't understand, who have those biases and prejudices from whatever walks, and in particular victims,
Mm.
because people who are victims of crime, it's really hard for them sometimes to forgive, and I understand that.
Yeah.
So anything I can do to lead by example, to show like this is the possibility from the perspectives of the people still inside who are looking out at me, to say I can do that too if we follow the right path. And for people out here who see me and be like, okay, so people coming out of prison can re-enter society successfully. So I hope to kind of continue being an example of that.
Yeah. Well, I think on that note, I mean, my last question for you, when you talk about, you know, you know, trying to find a way to find purpose and like helping other people now that you've moved past incarceration, a few hundred students are going to see this video. If you could just leave, like, what would be like one last message you want to leave with young people about what you've learned in your story and what you want them to know?
That's a hard question too. Just, I mean, you have to constantly take stock of yourself, see where you're at in life and where you're headed. because one of those paths could be prison, and that's not good for anybody. It's not good for your family. It's not good for yourself or society. So, really paying attention to where you're at and where your walk in life is taking you is really important. I like to every few years just stop and assess where I'm at. What have I been doing? Where am I at now? And where am I headed? And by doing that, you can really get a beat on, the things you need to change in your life to either stop doing bad habits or start doing the things that you need to get you to the place you want to be.
Thank you. I mean, I think it's amazing how much you've accomplished. Really recently, you already have your own company, already working, coding, blogging, writing. It's really impressive. So thank you so much for your time. I think this will be really, really good for the students to hear.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I really appreciate this opportunity.
Absolutely.